Good morning, everyone. Welcome to all of you to Mass this morning, and welcome to everyone joining us virtually today through Facebook, YouTube, and the radio. I'd like to share with you all this morning an experience that I had when I was working in my first assignment on Staten Island. There was a man named Nick in my first parish who often came to daily Mass. Every time I would see Nick, he would ask me to pray for his wife, Janice. Janice was 52 years old, and she was battling triple-negative breast cancer. Nick and Janice had two girls, Kristen and Kaylee. Kristen was 16 at the time, and Kaylee was 12. One of the things that so impressed me about Nick was that he would always ask me to pray for two things: for his wife to be physically healed, and secondly, for her to be spiritually ready to face God if the physical healing didn't come for her. Now that's the sign of a good husband. He was concerned for his wife's body and her soul. Well, one morning I got a message telling me that Janice had taken a turn for the worse. The doctors had given her 1 week to live. The plan was to take her back to Staten Island from Sloan Kettering in Manhattan and put her on hospice at home so that everyone could say their goodbyes. When I read that message, I heard a voice say to me, "Go visit Janice now." It wasn't an audible voice that I heard with my ears. It was a spiritual voice that I heard in my heart. And the message could not have been clearer. It said, "Go visit Janice now." Now, this was my day off. And they always tell us priests in our training to guard our day off jealously so that we don't get burned out. Janice also had a week to live and would be coming home the next day, so it wasn't like this was the only chance I had to visit her. And yet, I heard the voice in my heart again, "Go visit Janice now." So I immediately got in my car, put the key in the ignition, and made the hour drive from Staten Island to Sloan Kettering. When I got there, I found Janice with some of her family members by her bedside. Together, we all prayed the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Then I gave Janice the last rites, and then I gave her something called the Apostolic Pardon. That's a special blessing that a priest can give by the power of the Pope that forgives a person's sins when they're dying and erases their purgatory time and sends them straight to heaven. If you want to go straight to heaven, make sure you tell your family members you want the apostolic pardon when you're dying. So after we prayed the Divine Mercy Chaplet and I gave her the last rites and I gave her the apostolic pardon, I chatted for a little bit with Janice's family and I went home. Well, you can imagine my total shock when I woke up the next morning and saw a message on my phone telling me that Janice had died at 11:32 the night before. The woman who was supposed to come home the next day and live for another week died just 12 hours after I visited her. And because of the sacraments and the blessings she received during that visit, I have no doubt that she went directly to heaven. Nick's prayer for his wife had been answered. Her body may have died, but spiritually, Janice could not have been any better prepared to face Jesus than she was that day. Well, God taught me a very important lesson that day. God taught me that when He makes it clear that He wants you to do something, you have to do it right away. We must never procrastinate with God. I realized that if I had procrastinated that day, if I had waited even one more day to see Janice, she would have died without the last rites and without the apostolic pardon. Now, I don't want to make myself out to sound perfect. There have been plenty of times in my life where I put off what I knew I should have done right away. But in this instance, by the grace of God, I obeyed immediately. And because I did, I believe firmly that Janice went straight to heaven. Well, in our gospel today from Mark chapter 1, we have the story of the call of 4 of the 12 apostles. Jesus is walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he calls 4 fishermen to follow him and to become fishers of men: Simon, Andrew, James, and John. If you spend a little time meditating on this gospel, one detail that will jump out at you pretty quickly is this: all 4 of the men that Jesus calls that day on the Sea of Galilee, they answer his call immediately. First, Jesus calls the brothers Simon and Andrew to follow him, and the gospel says that right away they abandoned their nets and followed him. Then he calls James and John, and the gospel says that they left their father in the boat and followed him. Simon, Andrew, James, and John, they didn't hem and haw. They didn't hesitate. They didn't say, "Give me some time to think it over, Jesus," or "Come back tomorrow, Jesus, and maybe I'll follow you." No, they followed Jesus immediately, without procrastinating and without even thinking twice. Well, when God asks us to do something for him or for some other person, he wants us to respond the way the apostles did, immediately. Do we have any procrastinators in the house today? Do you know the motto of the International Association of Procrastinators? Why do today what you can put off until tomorrow? But God says to us, why put off until tomorrow what you can do today? If there's one thing the pandemic has taught us, it's that tomorrow isn't guaranteed to anyone. Life can end at any moment. As St. Paul says in our second reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, "I tell you, brothers and sisters, the time is running out." You can live your life according to the procrastinator's motto if you want to, but how can you be so sure that you'll have tomorrow? Let me tell you about another person I met in my first assignment. I have to warn you right away that this story does not have a happy ending, but I think it's really important for us to hear it, so I'm going to tell it to you. This woman, I'll call her Jane, was 69 years old, and she was Catholic, though she never went to Mass, and she hadn't been to confession in many, many years. She lived in an apartment beneath a very beautiful and very Catholic family from my parish. Well, Jane became friends with the family in the apartment above her, and that family would frequently invite her to go to Mass with them. They would even invite her to go to confession with them. But every time they extended the invitation, Jane would always say, "I can't this Sunday, I have company coming over." When the next Sunday would roll around, the family would invite her again, and again she would say, "I can't go to Mass this Sunday, I have company coming over." That was always her answer. Well, one day, the family heard a loud thud in the apartment beneath them. Jane had a heart attack, fell on the floor, and died instantly. She died without going to confession and without having returned to Mass. She was so convinced that she had plenty of years to take care of all of that before she died. But little did she know that her time was up at 69. Now, I don't know what passed between her and Jesus in her final moments, and I'm not saying she wasn't saved. I don't know. Our faith tells us to always trust in the mercy of God. But when the family told me what had happened, it really shook me up. I had met Jane personally several times, and I was praying for her to come back to the church. I also thought I had more time to work on her and get her back. I still think about her all the time, and I still pray for her soul to this day. And without passing any judgment on her, I just can't help but wonder how differently things could have turned out for her if only she hadn't procrastinated in doing what God was clearly telling her to do through that family. I think it's got to be said. God doesn't want us to end up like her. In our relationship with Him, God doesn't want us to be like that friend you invite for coffee who always says to you, "This week's bad, but next week will work," only to say the same thing the next week. No, God wants us to act on His word right away. The letter of James tells us to be doers of the word and not hearers only. And in the words of Psalm 95, "If today you hear His voice, harden not your hearts." Is there something that God is asking of you right now? There might be something He's asking you to do to grow in your relationship with Him right now. Maybe God's asking you to get back to confession, or to get back to going to Mass every Sunday, or to finally apply for that annulment so you can get married in the church. Maybe God's asking you to complete your sacraments, or to finally give up some sin that's been offending Him for years, or to finally start praying the rosary every day the way we should. That something might also be something in your relationship with someone else. Maybe God's asking you to call someone you haven't spoken to in a long time, or to visit someone who is sick or lonely. Maybe God's asking you to say to someone, "I love you," or to apologize to someone you've hurt, or to reconcile with someone you've been estranged from for just too long. What is the something that God is asking of you right now? Once you figure out what it is, don't procrastinate. Live the Nike slogan and just do it. That's what Simon, Andrew, James, and John did, and that's what God wants us to do too. And as God taught me so powerfully in my experience that day with Janice, far much more is riding on our prompt obedience than we could ever imagine.